Breaking news out of the Oval Office. We may be on the verge of a huge shakeup for the American economy. NBC News is reporting that last night, President Trump told a room full of lawmakers that he will soon fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. That's according to a senior White House official. Now, one Republican Congresswoman, Anna Paulina Luna, tweeted just a short time ago about this, that Powell's firing was, quote, imminent. But then, just moments ago, when asked if he was going to fire Powell, he said he talked about it as a concept. And almost all the people in the room said that he should go, but there is a big asterisk. Powell could go, says Trump, if he has to leave for fraud. Now, critics have pointed to a $2.5 billion renovation at the Federal Reserve offices as possible grounds. He answered several questions about this, perhaps most bluntly here.
Are you completely ruling out the idea of firing Jerome Powell?
I don't rule out anything, but I think it's highly unlikely.
I want to bring in NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, who's covering the White House. NBC's Christine Romans is with me. Peter Baker is chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. There was a lot there, but I do want to start with Powell, if I can, Kelly. He said it's highly unlikely that he gets fired. He's got 8 more months, but he also said we have a lot of people who want the job. Kevin Hassett is someone we'd consider for the job. We'll pick someone who is good. And that Powell has been a terrible chair who's doing a terrible job. So what's your takeaway?
Well, one of the things that makes this particularly difficult is that if you are trying to follow specifically what the president says on a matter such as Jerome Powell, in order to understand where the policy is, what his intentions are, we're still left with contradictions on contradictions. The president today seemed very much like he was backing away from it. There's significant reporting. He was told about the significant reporting that he had sort of test run this idea with lawmakers last night. He described himself as more conservative than some of those lawmakers on this matter, meaning that all of those, he said, or many of them whom he polled, said go ahead and fire him. Now, remember, the Fed is an independent institution. The president nominates but typically does not remove a Fed chair until the end of their term when they can select a new Fed chair. In this case, the president with the separated 2 terms would get to both appoint Powell, which he did, and would be able to appoint a successor when that time comes. What makes this so difficult is where is the actual ground truth and what does the president really want to do? He says he doesn't intend to fire him, and yet he has done a daily sort of damage to the credibility of Jerome Powell by raising things that the president believes are legitimate, that he thinks he's gone too slowly to reduce rates. Of course, also note that prices have gone up, which could be an indication of a little bit of an uptick in inflation that might actually cause the Fed to not want to reduce rates. But the president very frustrated, wanting rates to come down because he believes that would be an engine for the economy. But it is very hard, certainly for the public, to discern where is the truth when the president apparently polled lawmakers, discussed it openly, and then today says he's not going to do it. Now, obviously, the president has the right to retain his decision-making power for as long as he chooses. But it does raise questions about the fate of Powell, how markets might react to that. And if he's trying to sort of push Powell into a resignation, that could be another strategy. And the issue of cause. That building, the Federal Reserve building, 100-year-old building, has been going through a massive renovation. It seems only the exterior shell remains and everything inside it is being renovated. It is a very costly project. Is that Powell's doing himself? Certainly, it was passed by Congress. There are a lot of deep things to explore there. But maybe he's looking for an off-ramp. But clearly, he is muddying the waters day by day on the status of the Fed chair. And, of course, the chair does not act alone, acts with a board when deciding interest rates. Chris?
Yeah, she's right about the muddying of the waters, of course, Peter. And Kevin Hassett, who's the director of the Economics Council, was scheduled to be a guest on this program. And when this news broke that the president had raised the question of getting rid of Powell, he canceled. Of course, we would be happy to have him on anytime he would like to come on. But I wonder when he talks about possible replacements, when he talks about how many people would want the job. And by the way, if he's trying to pressure Jerome Powell, he has repeatedly said he will not leave if the president tries to fire him. Where does this leave things? What did you hear?
Yeah, I think it's worth remembering that we don't know that the president has the power to fire the Fed chair except for cause, right? As Kelly just said, he's putting a lot of pressure on him by raising it all the time. But Jay Powell has made very clear he's impervious to pressure from the president. He has ignored the president's efforts to push him to lower interest rates if he doesn't think it's the right policy to do. And so the president is kind of frustrated that that pressure campaign hasn't worked. But so far, you know, the Fed is an independent agency. Even the Supreme Court is recognized as being different than some of the other independent agencies. And there's a legal question as to whether the president can, in fact, push Jay Powell out. You know, in his first term, my wife, Susan Glasser, and I reported in our book, The Divider, Jay Powell was told by Fed staff that he would probably win a court fight, but that the Fed itself couldn't fund that court fight. He would have to fund it out of his own pocket. And Jay Powell told his staff he would spend every last nickel he has to fight Donald Trump if he tries to fire him. So even if the president were to try to fire him 8 months before the end of his term, it might not be resolved until quite a while down the road. So it's sort of a kind of a pointless exercise, you might argue, in that regard. And the pressure on him isn't working, but it allows Trump to blame anything that's going on bad on in the economy on somebody other than himself. It's not about his tariffs. It's not about his policies. It's about Jay Powell.
So, Christine, so far, checking it out, the markets are holding up, but they're down, 7 points right now. What do you make of this reaction?
Well, I mean, markets clearly think this is presidential bluster, but those of us who've covered the Fed for many years see this as the biggest attack on the independence of the Fed in our lifetimes, right? And the Fed is really essentially the shock absorber for the American economy. The Fed chief runs a team of governors and regional Fed presidents who together as a committee decide what to do with interest rates to make sure that the job market is sturdy and inflation doesn't get out of control. They're working on behalf of the American people, not the politics of the White House. Every White House would like to see lower interest rates. That would goose an economy in the near term. It can also fuel inflation, something we've seen in Turkey, something we've seen here in the 1970s. It really caused a painful period for American people when the Fed was cutting interest rates when it shouldn't have been. And so this is all what they discuss in these Fed meetings. I'll also point out that the Fed is funded by interest on the securities it holds and fees for banks. We're not talking about taxpayer money here that is being misspent, if that's what the president is accusing about the Fed and the Fed chief. But clearly, this pressure on the Fed chief is very, very pointed. This is the most pointed we've seen it. Now, there's a new governor position that's up in January. So clearly, already they're talking in the administration. That's appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. There are 7 of those positions, and there are 5 regional governors. This is all designed to be a separate institution that is impervious to this kind of pressure, the pressure the president continues to pile on Jay Powell. As Jay Powell, I will say, has been very steady, very measured. He just doesn't ever take the bait from the president here on this.
Yeah, and in fact, Peter, the president has indeed been talking about this for a long while, but he was always talked out of it, right? I wonder, just listening to Christine, if indeed he's making this calculation. Is part of it he loses someone who he can point at if the economy doesn't go the way that he wants it to, and their decisions on interest rates? Is this just an old-fashioned trial balloon? Why even bring it up in a room full of lawmakers in the first place?
Well, I mean, look, they obviously wanted that to get out, right? They knew if he raised that in front of a bunch of House Republicans like that the story would get out. And that was intentional. I mean, that seems a reasonable inference anyway. And again, as part of this pressure campaign, how can he raise the heat on Jay Powell or, again, create at least a distraction from any issues with the economy in terms of his own responsibility, or for that matter, distractions from the Jeffrey Epstein thing, which is, of course, is, consuming his his MAGA base right now. It always helps. Look, Donald Trump loves to have an enemy. Right? You heard him time and time again in that pool spray talk about Joe Biden, who hasn't been president now in 6 months. Jay Powell is another useful enemy for him. He's trying, of course, to rally his supporters to say it's about the Democrats, it's about Jay Powell, it's about Chris Wray, it's about somebody other than me, and stop focusing on Jeffrey Epstein and making Pam Bondi your target here. Let's go back to the people that we like to target together.
Yeah, and Christine, let's talk about the big picture here. Deutsche Bank warning that taking Powell out could lead to both the currency and bond markets collapsing. The CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase saying backing Powell, saying playing around with the Fed can have adverse consequences, the absolute opposite of what you might be hoping for. What are you hearing around Wall Street? What do they see as the risk? Because, again, as people look at the numbers, the Dow right now down 1, they're thinking, well, maybe Wall Street isn't so worried about that possibility.
Look, when you hear people like Jamie Dimon on a call yesterday morning that I was on with reporters saying very clearly and very plainly that there are consequences if you rock the boat at the Fed, if you challenge the independence of the Federal Reserve, that will give you the opposite of what you want. The president wants lower interest rates. That could cause higher interest rates and mayhem in the economy. That was a clear warning from Jamie Dimon, and you've heard it from a lot of other folks too here. Look, the timing here, I think, is what's really important. In a few months, we're going to be talking about who the next Fed governor is going to be anyway. Jerome Powell is already out in less than a year anyway. So in a way, some of this might all be theatrics, quite frankly, because somebody's going to be named to that position in January. And then of those people, somebody will be picked to be the Federal Reserve chairman. So already Jerome Powell's time is running out. Firing him right now, many people on Wall Street say, just doesn't serve any purpose at all. I'll make one last point, Chris. I think it's important. Until recently, it was unanimous. All the people on the Fed board, some 12 of them, all voted not to lower interest rates. It wasn't just Jay Powell. It was everybody on that board until the last couple of meetings.